guys, CB Super. So Copus Al is asking if we could make a video showing how to animate wind direction or show wind direction using animated arrows. Kind of like you would see in like a news forecast where you can actually see the direction of the wind. So there's probably hundreds of different ways that we could actually do this. So if we jump over to Fusion here, I'm going to show you two different ways. One's going to be really simple, really quick. It's just going to use a particle system. And the other one is going to use some duplication nodes to animate and use like some animation on a motion path. But it all kind of starts with getting some kind of arrow. In order to get an arrow, you can just search arrows for like a PNG or even a vector file on the internet. I just went to Pixabay and I typed in arrows and I clicked on the vector graphics section, and there's tons of free arrows. And I just picked one that was blue that kind of looked a little bit like wind, and then they're all free downloads. So if you're following along at home, you can either click on the same graphic I used, which is this arrow here. Or you can, use whatever you want. You can even make your own arrow really simply, either out of using the polygon tool, or you can use the paintbrush tool to make your own vector. All right, so I'm actually going to jump out of these compositions and let's go ahead and start a new Fusion comp. And I'm just using this sailboat video as a, just something that we would be able to see the wind. All right, let's jump into this Fusion comp real quick and let's take a look at how we can make some of these systems. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just drop some footage in just so I have something to kind of gauge what I'm looking at. I'm also going to go ahead and drop this arrow in because no matter what I do, I'm going to be using this arrow in order to drive whatever animations I make. So the first one's going to be really easy, and you can get super complicated with it if you want. We're just going to be using a particle system. So let's go ahead and just drop this media into this, and we're going to go ahead and connect this to the media out. And we're going to just set this as our arrow. We're going to go ahead and rename this. I'm just going to say arrow, so I know that this is the arrow, and I'm probably going to just call this sailboat. So since I'm going to be bringing in a particle system, right up here in this toolbar, this is your particle emitter. And if you just hover over it, it'll tell you what it is. This is our particle emitter, and then we're also going to bring in this particle renderer. So I can just click on both of these. It's going to go ahead and connect them. All right, so once I bring this in, now all I have to do is I can come over here and I can just merge these two together by just dropping it onto that the little white square on the sailboat. I'm just going to merge them together. And if for whatever reason, if you've loaded this up in and you already are looking at this in like a 3D view environment, if you come over to the P renderer, and it should be, hopefully it'll be in 2D output, but if it's in 3D output, you can switch it here. You notice that if I go ahead and remove this, if it's in 3D, I won't be able to drop it into this 2D merge. So just click on it and click on the 2D, and then you can drop it into a 2D merge. I know this because I've had many trouble with that myself. So now that we have this particle system, let's go ahead and change it into arrows. Now I can't just take this arrow and plug it directly into the P emitter. I actually have to come into the P emitter over into this the style section. Where it says point, I actually want to change that to bitmap. Now you're going to notice that a little yellow triangle opened up. I can now take this arrow and I can drop it into the yellow triangle, and now you notice that my particle system has a bunch of arrows. They're all kind of just clumped together at the moment, and if I hit play, you'll notice they're kind of coming on and kind of coming off. Let's go to the very first tab here in the control section, and I'm going to drop this number all the way down. And I'm going to actually hold down the command key where it says number variance, and I'm just going to add this just a little bit. That way that as this moves, the variance is going to drive the actual emitter and not so much the number. You can come into velocity. We can turn this velocity up a little bit just so it's kind of moving. And we can also come over to the style section and down where it says size, and we may want to size these up just so it gives us a little something to look at. Now we're not seeing anything yet, so we're going to go ahead and I'll turn up this just a little bit just so you can kind of see it. We're actually going to come over here to the P renderer, this pre-generate frames. Just go ahead and jack it all the way up to 100. Now you can come back over to the P emitter and you can turn down the number down to 0. And now you'll notice that we are actually getting arrows that are shooting out of this emitter, which is pretty cool. You can do a lot of different things with that, but we're not going to do that just yet. So let's kind of just see what this looks like merged together here. And I'm going to go ahead and dual screen this so I can also have this rendered out. So now as I press play, you can kind of see that they're just flying off into, oblivion. We can kind of set up this emitter a little bit better. In fact, instead of using this circle, I'm going to come over to the region, and where it says sphere, I'm actually going to change that to a line. And the reason I'm going to change it to the line is because the nice thing about a line is you can actually change the start and the end. And so I can pick up one of these, and I can go ahead and because the way that a sailboat actually moves is it moves in like relation to the wind. So I'm just going to move this line up here, and I'm actually going to move it on this section. It'll be a little bit easier to see if it's just kind of in the sky. Now we're going to have to actually turn the angle. So let's go back into the P emitter, come back over to the control section, and down where it says velocity, we actually want to change the angle. And because right now we can't see anything. So let's go ahead and change it. Change the angle to 180. What that's going to do is that's just going to start shooting them in the other direction. So now you notice that the arrows are now traveling in the direction that we want, but they're not facing the way that we want. But we can totally change that up by just coming over to the arrow. You can click on that. You can shift space, type in XF to give us a transform node. And the easy way is just to flip that. And now the arrows are going to be facing in the correct direction. All right, before I even transform it, I'm actually going to come in here and I want to resize it. And the reason I want to resize it is because I want this to actually be, I want to be able to adjust this in a 19 by 1080 comp, and then now I can come in here and I can resize this. I can make them smaller, I can make them bigger. And if this ends up stretching it for whatever reason, you can always come in here and you can resize it by using your X and your Y's. Alright, so once your arrow is the way that you'd like, you can also, of course, add in all different kinds of effects. If you wanted to, you can add it either before or after. I would add it before the emitter. Say if I wanted to make some waviness to this, I wanted to add some kind of distortion, you can do that. You could add some glow. You could even get crazy with it. And you could, add some of my own alpha glow here. All right, anyways, there's tons of different things you can do with this particle system, and the nice thing about a particle system is it runs kind of fast. You can come in here and you can play with this emitter. You can play with the velocity. If it's too fast, if you need to slow it down, by all means, this is going to be where you control it. We probably have way too many arrows here. You can drop down the number of variants if you need to drop down how many arrows you got. We pre-rolled it so the arrows will be continuously moving. If for whatever reason you want the wind to come in a little bit later, you can just come in here and you can remove that pre-roll or that pre-generated frames, and now it will start at 0, and as you play, the wind will just start moving. So now you'll see the arrows coming onto frame, and that's pretty much the easy way to do it. So that's pretty much the first way to do it. I mean, look how easy that is. It's just a couple of nodes using an emitter, and we just used a bitmap in order to bring in our own graphic. And again, this arrow can be any type of graphic. You can make this arrow. Let me show you real quick. Let's go ahead and just delete this section right here. I can come in here and I can actually do maybe a paint node. Alright, let's take a look, and we'll just drop the alpha all the way down. I can come over to the paint section. I can turn it on single stroke. So now if I come down to stroke controls, you'll notice that my stroke animation is for all frames, and that's what we want. We want whatever we draw, we want it to be on at all times. Start this back at 0, and then you can just come in here. Maybe if I was like way better than I am at drawing, maybe this would be my arrow. And now I just come over here and this will end up being my sprite. And so now you see I have all of my hand-drawn arrows, which are absolutely amazing. I mean, it's that easy. So tons of different options here. Obviously the white doesn't show up very well, but just know that tons of different ways you can make arrows. You can also get any object you want off of the internet there. So let's go ahead and let's show the other way we can do this. Now this other way is a little more complicated, but you're going to have a little bit more control over the actual path that it's taking. So I'm going to come back in here, I'm going to drop this arrow back down, and let's go ahead and start making some kind of path. So the first thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to come in here, and we already know that we're going to have to resize it because it's going to be a really weird size. So now it starts off as this like 640 by 320, and we just turned it into a 1920 by 1080. We know that we're going to want to come in here and we're going to want to transform it because we know we're going to have to animate it. We want to do some type of animation, and we're going to be using a motion path. Now, if you haven't watched my motion path video, there'll be a little link up on the right hand corner. So I'm also going to come over here and click on where the media is, the arrow. I'm going to go ahead and rename that arrow, just so I can always remember. And I'm also going to come in and shift space, and I'm going to bring in another transform. And that's just because I want to make this smaller. I'm just going to drop this size down quite a bit, just so it kind of looks appropriate to whatever I want it to be when it's actually moving through the sky here. I also know that we're going to probably flip it because I'm going to want it to come from right to left because that's apparently how sailboats move. Don't quote me on that. Alright, so in order to animate this, we're going to need some kind of spline. I've showed the difference between the polygon and the B-spline and why I don't like to use the B-spline very often because we always have problems when we are doing heading, but I'm going to show you real quickly how you can kind of get around that, and it's not really a hack, but it's kind of just a neat function that Fusion has inside of it. Let's go ahead and get out of this for right now. I'm going to go ahead and click on the actual B-spline, and I'm going to show you really quickly. Alright, so I have these points, and let's say that I want the wind to come down, and maybe it's going to kind of like swoop down for whatever reason, and then it's going to kind of swoop up. And this is how I want the wind to travel. I want it to travel from all the way over here to all the way, somewhere over here. If we go back into the inspector, I'm going to go through the process of getting this B-spline ready for animation. And in order to do that, we know that we have to come over here in the tool section, while clicked on the B-spline, right click here for shape animation. I want to right click there, and I actually want to remove the B-spline first, and then come back over, re-click it, and hit publish. Alright, now it's all set up. I can move it off to the side, and now I want to come into my animation where I'm going to use this transform in order to animate that arrow onto that spline. Over on the transform section, if you remember from the other tutorial, we need to come over to the center area and right click and click on path. What that's going to do is that's going to give us the option now to jump over into the modifiers. First thing we always want to do is get rid of this first keyframe over on displacement. Right click here for shape animation. Go ahead and right click. Come down to connect to the B-spline polyline 1 and value. So now it's connected to the B-spline here. I can come over here to the transform, double click over on the path. If I move this displacement, you'll notice that it is now moving along this path, which is exactly what we wanted. In fact, we can actually merge this in just so we can kind of see. So now when I'm on the transform and I'm in the modifiers, the displacement is what's going to drive that arrow along this path. But you'll notice that it's not really following the B-spline very well. In fact, it's just pointing forward, and it's just continuing to move in the same fashion. Instead of, I kind of want it to follow the curvature of this line, which is, I thought that'd be a little bit cooler. So in order to do that, we're going to have to use the heading. Not the heading offset that's right here. We're actually going to use, inside the transform, back over in the tool section, there's this angle. So I'm going to go ahead and right click on the angle, and then come down to connect to, path, and then it's going to give you the option for heading. Alright, so, that didn't do quite what I wanted. Come over to modifiers. Now if I'm doing displacement, you'll notice that it's doing this really weird thing where it's going almost the opposite direction that I want it to go. And I've never had much luck with using the B-spline for when I'm using heading. So a really easy thing is you can actually turn this B-spline into a polygon, and it's going to maintain the curvature that you use the B-spline in order to create. It's just going to add more points in, so it'll be an actual polygon line, a polyline. And all you have to do is, with it selected, you can right-click in the window here, down here where it says B-spline polyline, B-spline to Bezier, and what that's going to do is that's going to now convert it into a nice little polyline there. And that should fix a lot of your problems. You may have to come back over to the transform and flip it again. But once you do that, you can come back over to your transform, back over to the modifiers, back over to the path. And now when you move the displacement, you'll notice that it's perfectly moving along with your line. So that's pretty cool. I mean, that's like 80% of the way there. Now all we got to do is maybe make more arrows so that we can, tell that this is the actual wind and not just, an arrow that's shooting through this guy's sails. Let's see how we can do that. But first, let's go ahead and animate this. We don't want it to animate too quickly, so let's go ahead and go to frame 0. We'll start it off over here on the left, closer, like right about there. And we'll go ahead and add a keyframe, and then come to the end of the frame, and then we'll just move it all the way down to wherever the end is, maybe right about there. All right, and it's going to automatically set that keyframe, so you want to do it. That's our base animation. Our base animation is now set up. Now you can just leave this polyline somewhere over here. You don't really need it anymore. It doesn't need to be connected to your actual flow. All right, so we have this transform already done. We're going to go ahead and add our first duplicate node, which is just if you shift space and you start to type in the word duplicate, it's going to be the first one that pops up. You don't want the duplicate 3D, you want the duplicate. Once you click on that duplicate node, it's going to give you the option of copies. So how many copies do you want? So for this first section, I would probably just put like, I don't know, maybe 10 copies. And then what we're actually going to do is we're only going to use this duplicate node for the offset of time. So if I move it all the way to the right, it'll start to push those arrows further in time. So if I find that like this isn't enough, I can push it even further to say 10. So for this particular setup, I'm actually going to need more time offset, and you'll have to play with the time offset, because the time offset is going to actually increase or decrease the amount of distance between between your arrows. So if you bring it down, you'll notice you're going to get them actually touching and intersecting. You can always decrease either the amount of copies, or you can increase the actual time for the offset. And all it's going to do is it's going to space them out apart. They're still going to animate in the same speed in which they were animating. It's just now they're going to be, going one after the other, slightly different. So, and if for whatever reason you want this to go to the very end, you can always just add in more copies. I can double this and give it like 20 copies. And likewise, you can always offset the time negatively. If for whatever reason you want you could do like a negative 20, and it's just going to last longer, but then it's going to start later. So depending on your animation, one thing is that the duplicate node does run a little bit heavy, so you may want to, while you're working on it, you can drop it down to proxy mode, and you'll be able to watch it just a little bit easier. It is going to decrease just your viewer output, so it's not going to be looking in the high def that you normally get. You're going to be looking at half the resolution. But when you're just animating, usually it's just fine, and it'll run a lot faster. You'll actually be able to see, especially with the duplicate node that is a little bit computationally heavy. That's the first set. We went ahead and we duplicated the amount. Now we're just going to shift space, add another duplicate node, and this time we're going to use this just to make maybe 2, or you can even add, I think in the demo I had 3 different copies. And now what you would do, instead of offsetting the time, you're going to actually offset the Y value. Or you can, if for whatever reason, whatever direction that you're wanting to go, you can offset that. So what this is going to do is this is just going to give you more copies, and now you're basically going to already have that animation where the wind is going to be coming down, and you can if you offset this up, it's obviously just going to push them up. If you offset it down, it's going to push them down. So just keep that in mind. Then when you're duplicating these and you're animating them, if for whatever reason you don't think that there's going to be enough room, you can always come in here to this transform in the very beginning, and you can just move this up or down in the actual screen here, and that will move your animation up or down accordingly. And you can also, just like in the bitmap, you can always come in here, and of course, you can come in here, you can add glows, you can still come in here and you can change the looks. It's pretty much just like if you were to work with anything else. The only difference is now, you just went about it in a slightly different way, where you have a little bit more control over the animation, a little bit less control over the variance. Now you can come in here and you can play with this duplicate node, and there's plenty of different types of variations you can add. You can even come over to the secondary tab here. I will say though that this is not very intuitive, the second tab. It moves things almost around in a really weird way, and it will definitely vary up your animation. The only thing is it's going to start to push things maybe a little bit outside of whatever 1080p square box that your actual animation is working in. So you might get like some weird cutting off and sorts. But by all means, play around with it. You'd be amazed at all the weird animation styles that you can get just using the duplicate node. I do like the duplicate node. There's a lot of things that I use it for. The only thing I'm not real happy with is that the duplicate node is real heavy, and it will slow down your animation process. So a lot of times I spend more time dealing with the actual original animation. Once you get that original animation done and to your liking, it's real easy just to throw on a duplicate node, and then you can even add motion blur to this if you wanted to. Just know that the motion blur is actually going to be added to this animation transform, because this is where the actual object is moving. So if I come into this transform here, and I come to the secondary tab here in the controls, I can come over and I can click on the motion blur. It's going to give me options on quality and shutter angle. You can play around with this. Don't go too crazy with the quality, because it's going to drastically increase the amount of motion blur that you get. Those those flying glowy arrows. So maybe we don't need that the alpha glow in there. Let's go ahead and delete that. All right, and you can see, maybe that motion blur is just a little too thick. We can always decrease that. Honestly, for an effect like this where I'm showing arrows, I don't think you really need the motion blur. They're not going to be moving very fast anyways. You're just showing the direction of the wind. So, I don't know. That's two different ways you can do it. To be honest, I like both of these ways. So I hope this is kind of what you were looking for. I hope this helps anybody else out who's looking to do any kind of repetitive animation that maybe doesn't require actual animating of the graphic itself. But you could also come in here and you could animate this graphic, and you would just animate it before bringing it into whatever system you're going to use to duplicate and replicate it in order to, or create some kind of procedural motion. All right, so that's pretty much it for me today. I hope this helped you guys out. Hope you guys got something out of it. Maybe you guys learned something new. If you guys have ways that you like to do it, or you have any questions about what we did here today, please just leave it down in the comments. If you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe, hit that bell notification, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks.